Let's get to the learning process, starting with the first session of day one. Do use the hashtag marketing, the number 2, CONF, to share the ideas you gain here and those on the World Wide Web. Times change, so does digital marketing. It is important that you keep up with the most recent marketing trends and comprehend how they will affect your efforts as digital marketers and influencers. But how do you do that? Don't worry. Join some of the world's leading marketers to learn firsthand how they envision the state of digital marketing in 2023 and our first fireside chat of the Marketing 2.0 Conference Winter Edition. Please welcome on stage the speakers of this session, Eric Yaillen, CEO of MegaFluence, and Joshua Harris, CEO of Harris Internet, to guide us through the topic, Mega Trends That Will Redefine Digital Marketing in 2023.
I guess we should start a little discussion here on what the trends are, since we're kind of maybe not dealing with marketing 2.0, but marketing 3.0.
Yeah, there's a few interesting trends that I've seen that I think are really going to define the landscape for 2023. And we had a preliminary discussion actually over the phone this last week about what some of those are. I think the biggest one we could start with would be probably artificial intelligence and how that's impacting marketing.
Absolutely. It's already on the scene and people are starting to use it.
I think the biggest thing that popped into the scene this year, and I think this is a really important trend, is how AI is being leveraged in the generation of content. I think in marketing, it can be a numbers game. You have to be testing things. You have to be producing more and more content. Now the tools to create that have exploded.
Absolutely. Have you been using any of the AI content tools yet? And what have they been?
So I've, one of my friends that I've known for quite a long time is actually the founder of, I think they're called Jasper now. And they actually just raised a huge funding round, close with HubSpot Ventures. And so they're doing a lot of really interesting things. And so for that, I think that they've focused on creating a really, really important community. And that community has been generating a lot of content. And it's allowing people to come together and find new ways to query what would normally just be manual on the labor side. So I think that that's one of the tools I really looked at and I followed quite a bit. But as far as deploying it, most of my friends who are in the copywriting field, they're using it more and more to just do a lot of that initial legwork in creating their content.
Now you can also do a lot with content even on images. I don't know if you've played around with DALL-E, but that's an interesting content tool where basically you just have to come up with the right keywords, the right phrase, and it's going to create some phenomenal images for you very quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing about marketing, really. I think that's the most important, is you don't really know what's going to work. You have a framework that you can guess where things are going to be. I call the battleship approach. You know, you have a general understanding of where things are going to hit, but now it's really about creating variations and testing those variations.
What about some of the ethical dilemmas? So, for instance, you can go right now on the web, and if you wanted to create a picture of a person, you can actually do that, and it's going to be a totally unique person that doesn't even exist in the real world. So, in fact, I know people that have, for instance, leveraged LinkedIn by creating fake profiles. You can use AI to create the entire profile for the person, plus the picture of the person. And then now as a solopreneur, you can actually have, regional sales representatives with AI-based systems creating all of those initial contacts with people.
It's an interesting arms race, is how I like to look at it. I was, unfortunately, what some would call LinkedIn spamming long before it was, I think, more mainstream on the scene back in 2014. I got involved in a lot of the LinkedIn automation that existed at the time when they let you send out 100 invites a day before they had, kind of pulled that back. So I think if you're looking at the platforms right now, there's a much larger emphasis on validating that these are indeed individuals because of the speed and the ability for this. I mean, liken it to spam email, right? It's like at the end of the day, you have to create mechanisms for trust to verify that people are connecting with actual individuals. And LinkedIn does typically do an annual purge, I think, where they try to make everybody verify and put their IDs on and show that you're a real person. So I think it's becoming more and more difficult to actually identify if you're interacting with a real person. So I think in-person events is another one of those things that's starting to come back. I think this year you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more people looking to build stronger relationships. But I think from a content arms race standpoint, the ability to create that has just 10 to 100x with some of these tools. Another platform, have you used or heard of Synthesia, which I think is,
Yes.
right? So you're seeing brands able to leverage really just tools to now, as an individual, the thing that would normally go through your mind where you'd say, well, I need to get this done, and now I need to sit down and map out what it is. And anyone here as a business owner has faced that frustrating point where you say, man, by the time I write out what needs to be done, I could have done it myself. I think that's going to happen a lot more.
Since you brought up the idea, the fact that in-person events are going to become much more important, there is that ethical dilemma that a lot of people are facing regarding AI. There's two sides of the argument. One is that AI can ultimately replace humans. And then the other argument is, no, it's never going to replace humans totally, even though there's a lot of deep learning. It's going to supplement and just make us more productive and more efficient.
I think that there's two sides to the argument. This year, I think John Deere is going to be shipping their first fully autonomous tractors. And you're seeing that now impacting, effectively one of the oldest professions that we all used to be in, as we all used to farm. And so now that you're seeing AI impact that field, you're having, effectively drone fleets. I think where people's ethical dilemma comes around it is more in the understanding that it can now create itself. And when you have something that can now create its next level of insights, what is the role of people in these types of tools? And I think the role is still in shepherding them, in helping direct them to be points of leverage. And that so far, it can't out-human a human yet, but that's part of that piece.
Now, obviously, AI is one of your specialties. And one of the areas that you're very involved in is the idea of dealing with appointment setting. So, there's a lot of people might hire VAs in other parts of the world to go do a lot of cold calling and trying to set those appointments. Tell us a little bit about your systems.
Yeah, so I got into marketing many, many years back and actually started as a copywriter. And along the way, the trend I always saw was different pieces of technology and tools that ultimately give you leverage, right? Because anyone can map out what a game plan of any sort is, and it's almost always a lot of work, a lot of very tedious little aspects. And I'm not against hard work, but I don't remember who said it, but someone was like, hey, give the hardest job to the laziest person, and they'll find that quick route between the two. So years back when I was working with a lot of marketing agencies, I still consult with some, but I'd work with a couple thousand of them, and they all had a similar problem, which is that they would get their customers, clients, and they'd be able to get them different lead flow, but then there was always this gap of, well, I can't turn those leads into appointments, because the vast majority of businesses that need leads, they just don't have the call center or the intake infrastructure to handle the demand that can be created. But then it also creates this, the classic argument where both sides are trying to blame the other person. And without having a consistent system of follow-up in there, it's kind of like you don't know, is it a lead quality issue where there's actually some qualitative issue, or is it just a follow-up issue? Because we know that today the attention spans are shorter than ever. I think it's like 3 seconds now. And it continues to go down, with TikTok and other things, just finding what you actually like. You're competing with that. So getting into appointment setting and saying, well, can we automate? Not all of it, but just most of the initial follow-up. And what's the most common function? Well, it's coordinating the time. So we said, well, instead of trying to have a call center call all the time and hit voicemails, can we create a system that will actually reach out, coordinate an appointment, and then actually then coordinate that around the availability of the business and then let them take the phone call. So we've done that in a lot of different industries. I think that's going to be another major trend this year, is people are looking for, someone called the category just more sales enablement. How can we reduce the manual labor that people are doing and make it more consistent, make it where when human interactions actually need to happen, they can be actually personal, when most of them, they say most of the same types of things.
Yeah. So because a lot of people aren't really familiar with how an AI system would work in this particular instance, kind of walk us through that process and what not only they would experience on the client end, but also the person who they're setting the appointment with.
Sure, yeah. So some of the organizations we work with, I mean, we work with a variety of different ones. Some are in the dental industry or the legal industry, or that might be in the education industry. And so what a lot of them will go through is some sort of a lead generation process. They'll get some information about a white paper or a webinar or some sort of,
Some type of lead magnet.
some type of lead magnet, right? And so then they have, traditionally a lot of these funnels will have a self-booking mechanism, something like with Calendly or Schedule Once or whatever the software may be. The problem that most people have is that the take rates on those are extremely low. Is that a lot of people, they see that and they still in 2022 don't know that that's actually a phone call they're registering for. And the show up rates are even worse. I mean, a lot of people I talk with when they have those, some of them have a higher than a 50% no-show rate, which is crazy to me to think that you're coordinating a time for an appointment. And more often than not,
Right.
people aren't showing up
Right.
or they're being unreachable. So appointment setters has become a bigger thing in the industry where they'll hire VAs or individuals that are comped and they'll be calling, they'll be texting, trying to get that person on the phone, coordinate a sales appointment. So what our system does is it just automates the email and the text follow-up around what they asked for, and it's coordinating a time. So it's like, hey, I saw you ask for this. Would you like to schedule an appointment? It might say yes, or it'll recognize different types of responses they have. And then it'll connect your Google Calendar, your Outlook calendar, and it'll conversationally offer times. So we found that when you give someone a link, we would call that passive scheduling, because it's very much like, hey, if you have time, when you're available, go ahead and schedule. So by switching to active scheduling and actually offering times from a calendar and saying, can you talk tomorrow at this or this time, we find that the take rate is much higher. And most marketing at this point is very broadcast oriented. It's very much talking at your audience. And what they're always looking for is the answer to their number one, I think, objection that they have in marketing and sales, which is that relevancy. How do I know that this is right for me? And that starts with that personal connection. And so having an individual reach out as an extension of a salesperson, offering those times, it'll coordinate the appointment, set the time, and then at that time, the salesperson will call that individual and have that appointment.
So since you mentioned Calendly, and a lot of people will use Calendly, if you have the paid version, you can have some level of workflow automated in it, which is basically after they've made the appointment, all it is the follow-up reminders.
Yep.
Please show up at this time and do that. You're actually getting to that before that. So you have a workflow ahead of actually even making the appointment.
Correct. So, I look at it like this. If you met with somebody and you made a personal connection, or if you have family members and you're trying to coordinate a time, right? You probably wouldn't send your mother a Calendly link to schedule a time to speak with you, right? You'd say, well, hey, when can you talk? And then you'd coordinate, and then you'd, at that time, call each other. So by doing a similar thing with your prospects, we find that it tickles that familiar part of their brain where they're like, oh, this is someone that I have a connection with, and they're coordinating an appointment with a back and forth as opposed to just scheduling it and then hoping that it happens. So there's also a much higher show up rate and a higher take rate. So we'll plug this into just about any sort of call it a lead funnel of any sorts, and we'll see 2, sometimes 3 times the number of appointments with no change in leads that are coordinated through this. And many times what we find is the show up rate's higher and the quality of the individual is actually higher as well, because a lot of people, they want to associate with something that's a little bit more personal and differentiated. And so we find that that's something that's worked quite well. And so a lot of our clients that use that with us, they're doing quite well. They're not having to rely on that manual labor. And of course, we also find it's coordinated appointments earlier in the day, before and after hours, and on the weekends, when traditionally it's really hard to have anyone in a sales call center capacity actually do that.
Yeah. What other, outside of content and appointment setting, what other areas do you see AI getting into?
So the other place we're seeing AI, and again, I think a lot of people throw it out there, but I like to be specific sometimes. It's like, well, what's the subset? It's machine learning, right? Which is really, it's deployed insights around data, collecting the data and saying what's more efficient. So the other place that we're seeing more of this is in the targeting side of things. You're seeing more and more of these platforms. We got lucky again where they pushed off the whole cookie phase out for Google Chrome, but they are eventually going to pull the plug on that. And I think that we saw the first shot across the bow with what they did with YouTube in the last, I think just this last month, they're pulling out a lot of the keyword targeting, a lot of the very specific placements. And so you're going to see AI start to become a lot more important when it comes to targeting on these platforms, because you're going to have to be able to use your first party data, model it to these ad platforms like TikTok and Meta and Google, and let them understand who the people are that are engaging with your content. They're never, at the end of the day, you have to play that delicate dance with these big platforms. They, to a certain degree, don't want to make you too good at targeting their people. You know, they don't get paid by lowering your ad spend. They get paid as you spend more of it. And I think actually you're going to see more and more Google and Meta, they're going to try to get more aggressive, I think, this year in going after the smaller clients and even some of the bigger clients and trying to pry away those agency fees from agencies. And so I still, to this day, believe that a smart agency who is connected with the client, understands their objectives, will always outperform some of the in-house people that you have at Google and Meta, but they're going to continuously come after that. They're going to look to try to grab some revenue this year.
And we've certainly seen that the cost per lead, cost per click, all of that has skyrocketed in the last year.
Yep.
One of the things that, when you deal with AI, you're dealing with so many different areas. One of the developments I'm working on actually is it's an AI-based autonomous flying vehicle.
That's exciting.
Look at traffic in some of the big cities, Los Angeles, where it takes forever to go 5 miles. Wouldn't it be nice to just get in a car, hover about 50 feet off the ground, and just go directly to that destination and work along the way, because you don't have to pay any attention to what you're doing.
That would be a lot easier.
But it's in the infancy stage. So we've seen the problems that Tesla, for instance, has had with their autonomous driving vehicles. Now, granted, they have to deal with actual traffic, so they have to deal with other people. But what do you think is the benefits versus the cons of things like that?
I think as you look at it, I read a book that had been recommended to me for a long time that I just had not gotten around to reading, and I just couldn't put it down. As The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. Would highly recommend anyone here who has not read that, pick that book up, because it really gives a good context to understand, like, where do we fit in and what are we actually watching happen right now? And what we're seeing is just this continuous specialization and this exchange that's driving a rapid innovation that we have never had really the framework to do before. So what I think is going to happen is you're seeing where companies are now they're trying to solve problems. And if you look at so many great inventions, they accidentally created something else while trying to do something else. Like the garbage or the waste product of what they tried to develop ended up being more valuable. And I think we're seeing that with Tesla, with Optimus. I think a lot of people have looked at that robot with extreme skepticism. But I think when you realize what he's talked about, which is we're going to try to solve the real world navigation problem. How do you navigate a 3D world? It's actually easier to have a robot do that than it is to have a car where you have other cars moving and you have people inside them, which is incredibly, it's certainly.
People don't process information as fast, do they?
No, and I think that the biggest issue they still have to solve is the liability one, is who, traditional insurance, you hit somebody, they hit you, it's very easy to determine what the liability is and who's responsible for that. But when you have a robot making those decisions, who's liable? And when you're talking about human, damage that can happen, that's a hard thing to quantify. That can be really, really high on the scale there. So I think you're going to see a lot of these applications kind of pull back and go more real world, right? More autonomous. And so you're going to see more on the drone side, more on, 3D drones and robots that are actually moving around your environment. And I think that's going to be not something I think we'll see this year, but it's certainly where you're going to see more and more of these things where people are trying to solve these problems. They're going to solve other problems, and just collectively, it's speeding up faster and faster.
So, AI is in its space kind of by itself, but really all of this new technology, the speed at which everything is evolving has increased dramatically, and it starts probably with in 2009 with the introduction of blockchain and Bitcoin. And since then, we've had NFTs and metaverses, and we're dealing with, again, going from third-party data to first-party data, which, you know, that's one of the hard things. You know, when someone says Web3, it can have different meanings to different people. And again, a lot of people, especially in the marketing space, they're only thinking of that third-party to first-party data issue.
Yep.
People, you know, and I'm in the marketing space, but I'm also in the blockchain, AR space, and all of that. We look at it more, again, with the things like NFTs. Now, what other areas do you think we are,
Well,
am I missing anything there?
Well, I was going to actually ask you, because you had told me this the other day, is like, where do you think smart contracts can possibly come into play? Is that something you think is going to become more important
Well,
this
that's,
year?
you know, the interesting thing about NFTs is 99% of the NFTs that you see out there right now are absolute garbage, because it was something that took off with, you know, digital art behind it, and it exploded, and all of a sudden people had this fear of missing out, and they wanted to buy things, and they'd see something that they like, and they'd think, well, let's spend a couple $100 or even a lot more. I mean, the biggest sale was $69 million. You know, at the end of the
guy's
day,
probably not feeling too good right now.
yeah, at the end of the day, you still ultimately all you had was a stupid JPEG. You
Yep.
know, if you look at some of them, you know, granted, some of the images were a little bit more unique than others, but at the end of the day, all you had was a JPEG. What most people miss out on the NFTs is that smart contract, and it's what you package with that NFT. So an NFT is similar to a logo. A lot of people think a logo is a brand, and a logo isn't a brand. A logo is just a graphic representation of a brand. And it's everything that embodies the brand that that logo represents. Well, the same thing in NFTs, it's what does it represent? Now, one of the areas I'm working in right now is in real estate. So, for instance, we're working with a developer in the US Virgin Islands who is building some high-end luxury vacation rentals. And what they want to do is fractional ownership. So before they even break ground, what we'll do is we'll create the NFTs with the smart contract. They're going to be essentially buying 1 week, and then they have ownership. But the cool thing about it is, number one, we can bypass the whole title insurance industry. We have an immutable record on the blockchain that always has a complete history from the creator to each buyer and each bid going forward. So you know what that entire history is of that physical asset. And then when they sell it, if they ever sell it, the original developer can actually get royalties and get ongoing sales. So where it's really important in marketing is, especially in the knowledge community, content creators, people are creating e-courses and things like that, or podcasts. So one of the best NFT launches that I've seen in the last year was by a gentleman named Rob Moore. Now, he's out of the UK. He's called the Disruptive Entrepreneur. He's a best-selling author. And what he did is he wanted to celebrate his 43rd birthday. So he created 43 NFTs. That's it. Wasn't that typical launch of 10,000 unique images. And he divided it up into 3 sets. He had soldiers, sergeants, and generals. And the soldiers were $10,000 a piece. The sergeants were $25,000 a piece, and the generals were $50,000 a piece. Now, inside of the smart contract, they included different things. Sometimes they were physical assets. Sometimes they were digital assets. Sometimes they were events, so in-person events that you could attend. Some of the things in the smart contract were transferable. Some of them were non-transferable. So because he's a very well-known podcaster, if you bought one of the generals and you were the first one in line, you got to pick from all of his podcasts which one you would own. Now that was going to be a non-transferable asset because you had to take that podcast and you would add in a commercial ahead in the front and in the middle and at the end that would then be related to the person who owned the NFT. Now, obviously, you don't want to allow that to be resold so that you always have to reproduce that podcast. But the original buyer, they got the first pick, they got to look at the audience metrics, they got to see which one, especially if you have content that can survive over a longer period of time. It has a lot of value. And so that was just one aspect. Another really good use of NFTs, a good example is Gary Vaynerchuk. So Gary V, now he did the 10,000 launch type of vehicle, but you became a member of the VFriends community, and you got 3 years of tickets to VCon. Now, in the past, before the NFT, VCon was still a $2,000 ticket. Now you can get it 3 years worth, and a lot of times you could get that NFT, if you got it at the right time, for $2,000. So you could maybe get 3 years or $6,000 worth of event tickets for the one price. Well, you could go 1 year and you could say, well, that's great, I went this year, now let's resell the NFT. So the new buyer gets 2 years, and you can recoup all of your expense. So essentially, maybe, again, certain conditions being right, you could recoup your costs, maybe you can even make money. And not only that, but Gary V, not only did he make the money off of the first sale, but if he had a royalty built in, he can now get ongoing revenue afterward. If you are a content creator that is doing music or art or something like that, think of Picasso. You know, Picasso, you do a great painting, you sell it once, and then you're done. Now you can create some great art, sell it to somebody, and when they want to trade it for another piece of art or do something with it, well, that original artist can continue to get earnings, and it can be a legacy to give to their heirs.
Yeah, I think in the context of what you said, the assets that are going to have a longer term time horizon and a longer shelf life are going to be more attracted to that, and probably ones where the transfer of ownership has historically been murky, such as real estate, international contract law, which is, of course, its own challenge. So yeah, I think that those are certainly areas that are going to be, we're going to see more of that as people are looking to facilitate ownership, transfers of that, and certain commerce elements. I want to change gears to another topic, which I think is going to be really important this year, and you and I were talking about this one, is how do you think the economic environment is going to impact things this year for people in this space specifically?
Well, obviously, the economy right now, everything is down. It doesn't matter whether it's digital currencies, fiat currencies, stocks, bonds, any type of investment. So people are going to be looking for well thought out anything. And in fact, again, this is another area where, at least the way NFTs have been implemented so far, and actually even the whole metaverse space, it seems to be a lot of people are looking at it as a money grab, the producers of these things. And what they're doing in the process, especially because people can lose money at this, is it really hurting their brand. And the smart people are going to think about their brand and figure out how can they maybe enhance their brand, add value to their customers, build that relationship, build that community with their audience through these new technologies.
Yeah, I think this year you're going to see a very strong emphasis on the timetable to ROI and the likelihood of that. So anyone that works with brands, whether they're small, medium, or large, even the larger companies that have traditionally sometimes taken a longer timeline. You know, I think the metaverse is like an example where there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, let's wait for somebody to figure that out. And when they figure that out, then I'll show up and be part of that. But right now, I think a lot of companies are not willing to take a risk. I think even another topic that's worth talking about is, you know, there's been a certain someone that had some legal challenges that has created a lot of lot of people tapping the brakes in their mind and saying, maybe I should just hold off on a lot of this whole crypto and everything space until it kind of settles down and, see how this all shakes out. And so I think that this year you're going to see, some regulation get pushed through, which I think is overdue for the crypto space to some degree, because without some protections there, I think that it's going to continuously be something where more and more people are going to lose their shirt. And it's like, how many more people have to have that happen before eventually regulation does step in? It's like, it's a matter of if it'll happen, or not really if, but rather when it will happen. I think that'll be a piece of that, because everyone this year is already kind of feeling very uneasy coming into this year. They're like, they don't know what's going to happen. And you have a lot of business leaders saying, hey, you should be prepared. You should be agile. You shouldn't make long-term capital expenditures. You need to look a little more short-term.
Well, two issues there. One is on the whole regulation side, everything is going at such a fast pace. And quite frankly, the legislators aren't keeping up. They don't have the staff to even understand most of this stuff.
No.
So there's always going to be a lag there. But any individual who's getting into the space, let's face it, it's a product life cycle just like any other product life cycle. And right now we're in that early stage where it's just the innovators, the first 5% maybe, that are dipping their toes in. Now, probably 90% of those people are going to get hurt because they're jumping in, again, that fear of missing out. So when you're evaluating these things, it's important to know who are the people behind it, what are their systems and methods and processes that are in place, what is the technology actually doing, where has it been adopted, where does the future look. Now, a good example of that is, you look at all these people that are creating any kind of token whatsoever, another cryptocurrency. Well, what they're doing is they're just looking at it as a way to raise funds more than anything. It's a way to bypass issuing traditional stock. So when you pick a currency or a coin, which one do you pick? So, there's obviously a lot of discussion about, is digital currency even real? Well, the fact is fiat currency even real? A lot of people don't realize the US dollar, only 8% of it is ever minted or printed. So for all intents and purposes, the US dollar is a digital currency. It just has the good faith and credit behind it. So then you're looking at Bitcoin. Well, what about Bitcoin? What is behind that? What gives it value? And really, that's just market forces.
Yeah.
Then you look at Ethereum, which is the next level of coin. And at least Ethereum is a technology, and you can evaluate the technology. You can see how it's been implemented. You can see that it's been used behind the scenes as the blockchain powering most of the legacy banking system. It's very much behind what's now known as the quantum financial system, which is where all of the banks are going. So if you're going to invest in a crypto, I'm not making any recommendations here, but at least when you're looking at it, you can compare what that particular currency is or that blockchain is and compare it to others.
Yeah, and I think in general, one of the good hats to put on is whenever you're looking at technology is put on the CFO hat and just say, okay, well, what is this actually doing, right? At the end of the day, if I implement this technology in our company, how does it actually show up in any sort of actual efficiency? And the number one labor, just say, I already answered the question, the number one cost in every company is the labor, right? It's the hiring of these people. And anytime you have something that can do what a person would otherwise have to do it better, faster, more effectively, with less error, those are the types of things that eventually they find their way in. You're seeing this massive automation wave on its way into just about every area of the economy. And I think that now it's hitting that digital realm. These OpenAI systems can produce contracts. They can produce business plans, because at the end of the day, we're really just combining a lot of information that already exists.
Right.
And so the ability to compile and organize and output these things is going to accelerate. And so anytime you say, hey, what would a normal person have to do? Can this do that? That's, to me, the best way to evaluate it. So Ethereum versus Bitcoin, it's like, I think in that scenario, it's the clear winner is Ethereum because of some of the aspects that it actually has to govern transactions in a more effective way, which is the main reason we've gone all in on the technologies we have, which are the appointment setting piece and then the AI audience piece, which is, can we effectively reduce your ad spend by using machine learning to collab and just connect a lot of data points around what people are doing before they purchase, feed those signals to the ad platforms, and produce an impact. Now, can a human do that? Yes, but the amount of not as fast, the amount of data science that would go into it, and the speed of cycling it to then deploy it, which still could have human bias involved, is a long cycle, and then that's what's creating those categories. And so this year, I think you're going to see the technologies that have really focused on the rubber meeting the road and that real world application. You're going to see a lot of those really thrive because businesses are now saying, yeah, we need to make investments in things that are going to offset our costs. The biggest one being, they're going to have to raise wages, and they are going up, and people are demanding that. And you're seeing more and more, I think, movement in the labor pool. I don't remember what I was reading, but the majority of people, was over half of them, thought that they would likely change jobs the next year, which I think is very interesting.
And of course, automation is replacing a lot of lower level jobs.
It's coming for the white collar class now. I mean, that's really what we're seeing next is anyone can understand, a drone powered harvester, replacing a person. But now we're talking about accounting, we're talking about contracts, we're talking about content creation. No one's really safe, in my opinion, except the people that are going to help businesses leverage these. So anyone who is a marketing agency or a consultant, if you work with businesses, you have to embrace these things as part of the reality. And if you're not helping install these tools into your client, if you're still, it's like hand-picking fruit metaphorically from the garden that your clients need tended, and you're not using the technologies, someone's going to knock on your client's door and they're going to be able to do more for less. And they're going to do that as a way to get that business and then, sell them other business lines and stuff. But anything that's the commoditized piece of this now is the cost will drop, and you're going to have, more and more people now kind of trying to leave the basement, so to speak, and you have to find higher value things. And I think consulting and strategy is going to become a lot more important because the wrong decision can become a lot more painful with the speed of things now.
And now the question is, how much of that, the strategy portion, will ultimately move to AI and deep learning and also replace the human? Because obviously we can make mistakes in our strategic decisions.
And you're 100% right with that too. You're going to see more and more strategy being produced by these because it's really what gives us the best chance of winning. Well, how can you know what is the best chance of winning a scenario? Typically, whoever has the most information and whoever can mathematically calculate that the most accurately. Well, machines are really good at that. They're getting better.
However, we've seen like in the NFL, that doesn't always work because they're dealing sometimes too much with metrics and not really the metrics can only do so much to determine the probability of a situation, but it really can't analyze what is physically going on in front of them. And so sometimes they make a mistake in the decision of, do they punt or do they go for the first down, things like that.
Or you see the officiating crew making a call that seems obvious to everyone watching on TV, and seems very different to everybody else. In fact, I was reading about this in, it was an AI article, I think it was about poker. And they had effectively created, now there's, of course, everyone has some flaws with the study, but poker an example where it's really about, hey, what is the probability of winning? And it just said, hey, it didn't play the players at all. It didn't try to bluff. It just played the probabilities.
Right.
It smoked every person that played, just playing off the probabilities, not actually trying to adjust to people bluffing or not bluffing.
Well, that's why we're here in Las Vegas, and that's what Las Vegas thrives on is the probability. And, the fact is they didn't build this place of losing all the time, did they?
Probably not, which is why I try not to gamble.
Now, one of the other areas that we're dealing with, since you mentioned the word basement, is a lot of us were basement dwellers over the past couple of years because of the pandemic. And there wasn't that human interaction. And so now we're getting into a whole new area, which is virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, metaverses.
Yeah, I think I'm still a little bit slow on really looking at the uptick of it. I think that it really just has to come down to utility at the end. And I think a lot of us, I would say in general, feel very overwhelmed. And even those of us in the technology field here, it feels like every day there's some new thing that someone's talking about. And it can be very easy to get a shiny object syndrome about it, where you're trying to chase different things and then you miss the fundamentals, the blocking, the tackling that has to happen. I think that you may see more of that, but again, it always has to come down to like, what's the tangible application? Like, how does it act? What problem does it solve for people? That, I still have clients of mine that can't open Zoom, and
Right.
which is fascinating at times. No offense to anybody, of course, with that. There's technology problems that happen, but I think you're seeing, coming back to what I said earlier, I think you're going to see more people go out to some events this year. Most of my great connections that I've made, and I've worked mostly remote most of my life, have been at in-person events. And there's something about those connections, shaking someone's hand, looking in the eye, that you just can't replicate with 3D to some
But
degree.
you're getting there. So I work in the world of high-end motivational speakers, people who are on stage for big events.
Mhm.
Les Brown, for example, one of the great motivational speakers of our time, he just did a metaverse event. And it's interesting, the technology is there that when he showed up in the metaverse, he was actually a holographic image. So think of the Star Trek, the Enterprise, and going to the holodeck, where you would actually interact with three-dimensional things. So he was a three-dimensional but real representation of himself. He wasn't this fake avatar. Now, not everybody, that's an expensive setup right now. But other people could participate in that same world as it exists today by creating essentially a two-dimensional, 3D looking like avatar and interacting in that same room and attending that event virtually, not having to travel far distances, not having to deal with the airlines and delays and cancellations and all of that. And they could do that off of a regular computer, the technology that they have at their desk right now.
Yeah, I think the virtual event space has grown massively the last couple of years. And I think you were even telling me the other day about some technology that has some kinesthetic capabilities that can be plugged into some of these machines. So maybe you can actually have a handshake.
You type up the handshaking. So, and you've seen this, I don't remember what commercial it was. I think it was maybe Cox Cable was doing it, where they have these things called synaptic devices. So you could actually wear a glove, and on that glove, if you're wearing the glove and I'm wearing the glove and we shake our hands, we're just as we're shaking hands, we could be in two different parts of the world, and we'll actually have that sensation that we're shaking hands.
So I could do like that virtual, put a shocker in my hand and shake your hand and play a prank on you virtually?
That won't work. Unless I have the opposite side on my glove at the same time.
Yeah. I think you're going to see more of that, and it's the technology and people's familiarity with it. I think you'll see more of that. For me, I've become a massive homebody. I mean, this is probably the first event maybe the second event I've gone out to in the last couple of years, because, you create I think everybody created a comfortable home working environment the last couple of years. And so, the whole get out and go out is actually less appealing than it used to be when you've kind of bridged that gap in your own living space. But I think you're going to see more of that this year. I think you'll see more virtual events or hybrid events where you have that, and just getting people out into more interactive environments where they can learn. I think that what you're looking at more and more is trying to capture people's attention in buckets. The advertising world, they look at live sports as one of those last frontiers where they can get the live interaction of individuals, but holding the attention of a group of interested people in a specific environment is going to become more and more important, because it's so easy now for people with their shorter attention spans for you not to have the successful throughput of your marketing campaigns that you used to have. Where another thing we didn't talk about earlier is response rates have dropped across the board. There isn't a company I've talked with that says, yes, it's easier to get in touch with my leads than it used to be. It's harder. I feel like a debt collector trying to call someone that asked for information or said they wanted to meet with us. And so, which is, again, why the other piece I mentioned earlier has made it an interesting impact, is just how do you actually create that one-to-one follow-up when, for you, with your own time, it's difficult.
One of the areas that, again, we're seeing where technology is evolving, virtual reality can take on, again, different meanings. So, again, I work a lot with course creators, content creators, and one of the areas you can get into now is 3D, 360 video. And the only way when you create that video, you can obviously watch it in a two-dimensional way, like a YouTube video, but you can't, because it is filmed in a different way or videoed in a different way, if you put on a set of VR glasses, it becomes very immersive. And also, you don't have the distractions of everything else that's around you, because, and you've seen the VR glasses, you're inside of there, and you can't experience anything but what is right in front of your face. So do you see that in terms of creating that relationship between a business and a consumer, or even in a business-to-business relationship, that type of technology will have a long-term effect? And then also, again, because of these things like metaverses, the idea is we're probably not, going back to the economic things that you were talking about before. Costs are going up. That's going to increase the cost of transportation. I just was involved with a mastermind in Bali. It was $3,000 traveling coach, and taking 2 days there and a day back just to go to that event. You could lower that cost of that event significantly just by employing things that are a little bit more using the new technology, but are maybe a little bit more immersive and create that relationship with the customer better than you would on just a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like, looking at the airplane analogy, it's like they effectively they're probably going to try to have a live component of events, and then there's going to be a virtual component that's actually can create, some more interesting ways to run events where you can have very limited in-person VIP elements, and you can use the scarcity and the limited nature of that to then at the same time offer an extensive virtual experience, and then maybe even trying to merge the in-person and the virtual ones where people can interact on both sides. I think you're going to see more of that. And yeah, the economic factor is certainly the case. It's not a whole lot cheaper to transport yourself these days. There's more ways to do it, but it's not necessarily cheaper. But actually, another thought came to mind, going back a few topics, which is these types of events are going to become, and these other experiences are going to become more important because effectively, most of the well-known content creators today, if they started today with the technology that exists today, they could become bigger faster with a smaller team than they did before. And so, no one's really safe right now. It's kind of to me, the reoccurring theme is that the arms race. If you could just imagine something and create, 1 million physical units of something without having to go through the product testing and be in the phone business, it's like that's the equivalent of what's happening with content. And you're going to see a higher output. You're going to see the algorithms are so good now at finding out what you like, and that's with the rate of manual content consumption. Right. When that becomes 10x to 100x in its ability, you're going to have more and more people on the scene. I think it's going to be noisier than it's ever been before. And now it's going to become more and more important to determine what people consider to be authentic, what they actually consider to be something worth listening to. Not just we all find our own echo chambers digitally created by these mass machines that can now pump out exactly what you want to see that will confirm the greatest psychological bias we have, which is that we're right, the whole confirmation piece of it. So I think it's going to be challenging now as a individual, as a business owner, and as a leader to find out what to listen to. And I think people are actually going to revert a little bit more onto some of the traditional thought leadership. And so people that have established themselves up to this point, I think will do well in this next phase because they can show that they kind of, for lack of a better word, manually created their way to that point with their own content that was somewhat unique.
So obviously everybody here is a marketer. They have to kind of figure out what they're doing today and how can they incorporate all of this new stuff into their plans. So what do you think people should be thinking about, and what steps should they start thinking of for their planning for the future?
I think it's a great question. I think the first thing is really just an assessment, depending on what you do, of where you're the most vulnerable to disruption, really, which is that most of us, really whatever we're selling, we are selling our labor packaged into a service, billing any number of different ways. And so ultimately comes down to someone has to do the work. So where is your service offering the most vulnerable to, basically the speed, anything that you're doing that's content creation? The artisanally crafted content is no longer going to be seen as important. They don't really care how you developed it, only that it was developed. Mm-hmm. And so anyone who's in the content space, you have to create content. You're either a performance marketer or you're a content marketer. You need to be leveraging that in your space. And then you need to be looking at the areas that have traditionally moved the needle. So if you have a pie and you say, hey, well, content is one piece and analytics is another, and maybe securing sponsorships. Another thing that we're actually doing, and this is very cutting edge for us, is really using AI in our outbound efforts, where now the AI tools that exist are allowing us to personalize emails and create a ton of different ways to get in touch with people through a traditionally crowded channel, but we can now personalize it, deploy it at scale, and get appointments in the B2B space that most people, we get them enough in a week that would normally have taken them months to produce. So it's hard to say what's not going to be impacted, but I think you have to look at your clientele and just say, you have to play defense. And anyone that has a client business, it's important to remember that people are knocking on the digital metaphorical door of your clients every day saying, hey, we can do something for you. And business owners right now they're gonna have their ears open and they're gonna be looking for this stuff. So I always say it's better to bring the newer stuff to your client than to wait for someone else to knock on their door, because the last thing you want to hear in a client business is, hey, well, why didn't you bring this up? Why are they saying that? You lose your frame as an authority, as someone who is looking ahead. And so anytime you have a specialization like this, I think it's important to let your clients know, hey, I'm looking ahead and I'm making sure that you're not the one that has to drag me and my service offering, an area that you're supposed to specialize in, into the future. So I think at a high level, that's the first places I would look, and then just say, where can I bring some newer technologies that provide efficiencies? Any of these companies out there that have software that's efficiency based, what they typically lack is that, as we call in transportation, that last mile, actually taking that to the end of the road, taking it to the client, helping apply these technologies to these companies. And I mean, the biggest example of that's like Google Ads. There's nothing really in there that you can't click around and eventually do, but there's a whole industry just doing that. So whatever it is that you're doing, finding other technologies you can bring to the table, letting them know that you are looking ahead of the curve. That's going to drive more referrals, that's going to drive more retention, and going to give you some level of future-proof aspect to what you're doing, because there's going to be more and more people this year looking at every line item of what they're doing. And if you're vulnerable, and a lot of agencies I talk to, they might have a couple big clients that end up taking up a lot of their time. You got to prepare yourself so that you don't lose a couple of those big clients, because that can put you into a pretty bad spiral if that happens.
Well, the framework that I have for my business, it's a 4-part framework, which I call, by the way, the MegaFluence method, and it's 4 parts of what any organization or business needs to achieve market leadership. Well, the first 3 parts they're just old-fashioned, pre-internet, traditional marketing business philosophies. The first thing you have to have is you have to have a strong brand. The second thing you need is you have to have methods, systems, and processes, and that can be just a stupid piece of paper that's a checklist as part of that process. Then obviously you need to know who your customer is and how to communicate with them. You need that regardless. I think most marketers have that to some extent down pat. Where they struggle with is the technology. The second thing that they have a difficult time with is the cost. So some of these technologies, where do you think that they fit in terms of cost? And how long do you think it's going to be before they're affordable enough for the small solopreneur type size marketing consultant?
That's a great question. So I think there's two sides to it. So on one hand, anything that's in the, as we call it, like the generative AI space, that's a cost savings in itself, right? So let's say you have a flat retainer of $5,000 a month, and $3,000 of that is allocated for content. Well, if you now don't have to sub out that work or have as much manual labor in that can create more margin that you can then redeploy to other technologies. The appointment setting side, like for us, like when we work with clients, sometimes they get started. I mean, it's less than half the cost of a full-time employee. It's more than a VA, but less than the cost of that. So there's a certain level there. So I think it comes down to every business is a little bit different. But I think a good general place, like everybody could find something with this, is find the areas where there's the most labor-intensive component that is value driving. There's value driving labor that you can offset even 20, 30%. I mean, that shows up in margins, and that's either a lower cost you can pass on to your client or more value that you can wrap in, and that's what they're all gonna ask for. And so I think eventually, anyone who's in copywriting, their clients are even gonna say, well, why aren't you using these generative tools? And if you are, is this taking you 5 minutes to do this, or is this taking you 5 hours?
But then they'll also say, how come I'm paying you so much?
That too, and then of course you can always say, well, if you're so good at it, you can do it yourself, Mr. Client. But yeah, I think you're gonna see more and more of that. I think that's a general area a lot of people can look, is anything in the generative side, because it's ultimately the labor. That's what comes into it, is the time that you have to put into it.
And then when you're dealing with something like an NFT, now you're talking again about how you're representing your brand, what assets it represents, and in that case, you're looking at how to develop recurring passive income streams that maybe didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other advice that you would have to marketers in that component?
Well, if technology isn't your domain, find somebody that can help you out with that, because that's the direction that everything's heading. And either the world's going to pass you by, or you're going to try to figure out a way to keep up with it.
Yeah, I think at the end, you spend the time either way. You either spend it trying to figure it out on your own, you spend it dealing with missing of the boat or getting blindsided, and these things are going to become faster. It's not like you can just kind of see if something's coming. You're going to be in the middle of the tracks, and the train might flatten you. So I think it's important to stay grounded in the fundamentals and look at how technology is disrupting those.
It's coming fast and furious.
Yep.
Well, I believe we've taken up all of our time. And if you have any questions, I'm sure we'll both be available to speak to anybody.
Yep. Thanks, guys.